With only $5 to his name, the black man faces a blind date. While the single mother and CEO at the next table are watching, it's the kind of night that should have been full of promise. A blind date, the excitement of meeting someone new, and a chance to escape from the pressures of everyday life. But for James, a young black man, things are different. He doesn't have the fancy clothes or the impressive resume most women expect. He's got $5 in his pocket, just enough to cover a meal at a modest diner. But little does he know, the woman he's meeting isn't the only one watching him tonight. The woman at the following table, the single mother, CEO of a growing company, has a lot to say about what's unfolding. And she's seen something in James that others might miss. Will he rise to the occasion, or will he be judged by what he doesn't have? James had been nervous ever since the invitation came through. He wasn't a guy who often went out on blind dates. Dating had always felt like a game for the rich, the well-dressed, the people who had everything in life sorted out. But tonight, he had to give it a shot. The girl seemed nice enough from their brief conversation online, and maybe, just maybe, this could be his chance. After all, who doesn't dream of something more? The diner was modest, tucked away on a quiet street. The neon sign flickered as if hesitant about the future, and the smell of fries and coffee filled the air. It wasn't exactly a five-star restaurant, but it was all he could afford. He rechecked his phone, counting down the minutes until his date would arrive. $5. That was all he had. There were no appetizers, no fancy wine. Just the hope that somehow this blind date might lead to something more. Across the room, Rachel, a single mother and CEO, sat with a colleague. She had noticed James the moment he walked in. She could tell right away that he wasn't what he seemed. People often assumed she had it all, money, status, the picture-perfect life. But they didn't see the nights she stayed up worrying about her son's future or the sacrifices she had to make to keep her company afloat. She'd been in James's shoes before, scraping by with little more than dreams to hold on to. But as she watched him, a feeling lingered. She could sense a story unfolding, one of courage, judgment, and perhaps even something more profound. James's date arrived late. He tried to keep his disappointment hidden behind a nervous smile. Her name was Emily, a woman with bright eyes and a warm laugh that had lured him in online. But when she walked through the door, James immediately felt out of place. She was dressed impeccably, her hair perfectly styled, and there he was, just a guy in an old jacket and worn-out sneakers, with his $5 bill hidden in his back pocket. Emily smiled politely and slid into the booth across from him. The conversation started slowly, with awkward pauses and strained topics. James tried to make light of things, cracking jokes about the diner's outdated decor, but Emily didn't seem impressed. She seemed distracted, her gaze shifting to the waiter who passed by, then to the menu, then to her phone. Rachel, still watching from her table, couldn't help but notice how uncomfortable James seemed. There was something about him, a quiet dignity, a sense of pride hidden under his nervousness, that caught her attention. She remembered being in similar situations, the subtle humiliation of not fitting in, of being judged by others who didn't understand the struggle. The difference, though, was that Rachel had the luxury of power. She could make decisions that shaped people's lives. But James, he didn't have that privilege. As the evening wore on, the disparity between James and Emily became more pronounced. Emily ordered wine, then dessert, making it clear that money wasn't an issue for her. But James, he was already calculating how far his $5 could stretch. He couldn't afford to order anything extra. Each item on the menu felt like a reminder of the walls that kept him from truly living a life like hers. Across the room, Rachel's colleague was talking business, totally unaware of the social tension unfolding nearby. But Rachel had already begun to form an opinion about what was happening. She could see Emily's subtle judgment. The dismissive glances, the faint smirk, the way she looked down at James's plain clothes as if they were a reflection of his worth. But Rachel was also starting to wonder, was Emily's judgment fair? And more importantly, what would James do next? The moment of tension came when the check arrived. Emily glanced at the bill, her face momentarily shifting to something unreadable. James froze. His $5 bill suddenly felt impossibly small. He fumbled for his wallet, but the weight of his financial reality hit him like a slap in the face. It wasn't just about the money. It was about the judgment, the expectation, the feeling of never being enough. He swallowed hard, trying to hide the panic rising in his chest. Emily, sensing his discomfort, smirked. "You know, it's adorable that you wanted to treat me, but—" She let the words hang in the air, a heavy silence settling between them. James didn't know what to say. He had nothing to defend himself with. His mind raced, the humiliation of the moment threatening to swallow him whole. But before he could say anything, Rachel stood up from her table. She wasn't sure what compelled her, but she couldn't sit there anymore. She approached James's table, her voice calm yet firm. "You know, sometimes the measure of a man isn't in what he can buy, but in what he's willing to give." Rachel's words hung in the air, the weight of them undeniable. Emily looked at her, confused, but Rachel didn't care. She turned to James and smiled, a reassuring nod that said everything. "You're not alone." For a brief moment, the room seemed to fall away. The tension that had defined the evening melted into something more profound, a shared understanding of how society judges, and how sometimes the most powerful thing a person can do is simply show up, no matter the odds. The next few minutes passed in a blur. Emily, embarrassed by Rachel's intervention, rushed to pay the bill, but it wasn't enough to erase the moment of truth. James and Rachel exchanged a brief, knowing glance. It wasn't about the money. It was about the courage to stand up when it mattered most. The willingness to confront the biases that ran deeper than the surface-level judgments. As James walked out of the diner that night, he realized something important. He had nothing to prove to anyone but himself. The world might judge him based on the little he had, his clothes, his money, his background, but none of that could take away the quiet strength that had kept him going. And Rachel? Well, she had reminded him that kindness and support could make a difference when no one else was watching. In the days that followed, James's life didn't magically change, but something shifted. He found himself holding his head a little higher, walking with a little more confidence, knowing that he didn't have to fit into anyone else's mold to be worthy. And Rachel? She went back to her busy life, but that night stayed with her. It reminded her that true power isn't in what you can buy, it's in the difference you can make when you stand up for someone who needs it.